I always like that part.
I am here with the phenomenal Jeff Berlin. If somebody had told me, Jeff, that I would have had you sit in that seat a few years ago when we first got this, it would have blown my mind. So this is like an absolute dream come true. We've just been, well, I actually wasn't having a coffee, but Jeff was having a coffee around the coffee shop down the road. And I was just telling Jeff that the first Christmas I spent with my now wife but girlfriend, she bought me, my main present was one of Jeff's albums, with this fantastic track on called Liebman on a Jet Plane, and Jeff had signed it, or maybe one of your staff, I'm not sure. But Jeff had signed it, and it's something that I listened to over and over and over for years to come. And in fact, getting ready for this interview, I had it on last week, I was listening to it, there was that Runaway Train, is it? Which we'll get into that technique.
Sure.
Anyway, Jeff, long story short, I'm a massive fan. Thank you so much for coming here.
Thank you.
The guys are,
thank you.
You know, like we're so lucky to have you here.
Please.
What I want to do before we get into any talk about playing bass is I want to find out how you actually started playing bass in the first place, or even music. Like, were your parents musicians? Were they into music? Like, how did the whole thing start off?
Sure. My father was an opera singer, and a good one, and sang in the New York area. And when I was young, they can tell from just my ear, the way I imitated songs. I used to imitate his opera.
Yeah.
I'd sing the opera that I heard on records. Oh, he has a good ear. We got to get him on an instrument. So when I was 5, I began violin lessons in earnest for a good 10 years and began right away. I actually, for some reason, remember my first lesson was on Saturday morning at 9:30. I don't know why I remember that, but I do. And the first thing was a G to, you know. Yeah. And I was in violin for a good 10 years. I was a symphony violinist, you know. I was a recital violin, not like the New York Phil or Carnegie Hall level, but I played that music that those people played.
Yeah.
So my fundamental years was based in the training of music, and I played it for a good 10 years.
And do you think your dad, was that his vision for you? Was he like, you're going to be in the New York Phil?
I think his vision was to give me a gift, which is to allow me to undergo involvement in music training that he actually years later told me, I wanted to give this to you so that, you know, if you wanted to go into music, you'd be well prepared.
Absolutely
So,
fantastic.
Yeah.
You did that for 10 years you did that for, yeah?
I was from 5 to 16, so about 11 years.
Yeah. And what was the experience like? Was it something that you absolutely loved 100% of the time, or did you ever have, and I'm saying this because there'll be young dudes and dudettes out there listening, and they might be really, into it one minute, and then, I don't know, want to get on their iPhone the next. Obviously, that wasn't around when you were a kid, or when I was a kid for that matter. But what was that experience like when you were young? Were you always like 100% in, or was it fluctuating?
I got to confess, I was never 100% in, and I had fortunately sensitive and loving parents who didn't allow me to be in charge of how to decide what to learn. They said, as a child, we're going to give you this. It's part of your daily regimen, but we'll do it with love, and if you do it nice, we'll give you a reward. And they treated me as a child, but at the same time, I can't say I was ever in pain or emotional distress, but I can't say that this always gave me pleasure either.
Yeah.
But I did see how everybody was taught on all instruments. There was a school called the Edith McIntosh School that closed down that was focused entirely upon the training of violin and piano and trumpet and oboe and bassoon and all of these things. So I can't say that I loved it. I didn't. But I did notice a joy out of playing later from having had my parents sort of say, yes, we really want you to do this.
Yeah.
And I didn't argue with it because I like music. So
yeah, well, I'm guessing that when you start something like I was I say late starter.
Yeah.
So tons of people watching be like, late starter? I just started playing bass at 18, guitar when I was 13. Mm-hmm. But some kids are like you and they start really, really early. And a few of my friends, when they started really early, it's almost just always been a part of their lives. It's almost like they can't really wrap or get their hands around when they initially started and what that experience was like, because they were so young when it happened. They were just like, well, it's just something that I did every day, almost like almost like going to school. I played the guitar, played the violin in your case. But when did you find the bass?
The Beatles came along. I saw them on their I didn't go there. I saw them on television on Ed Sullivan that night. It was a Sunday night in February, and the Beatles right here in our state. That's how Ed Sullivan talked.
Yeah.
And he Beatles.
Oh yeah, I'll tell you something. I think you'll understand when
I didn't think much about them because they didn't play Beethoven, so I said, "Oh well, I'm not regarding them." Yeah. But as with everybody, it just got to me. I said, "Oh my God, this is what I must do."
Yeah,
it was compelling and irreversible. And I got a bass because on the violin, the strings from low to high are G, D, A, E. G, D, A, E, going from low to high.
Yeah.
On the bass, it's going from high to low, G, D, A, E.
Yeah.
I said, this bass ought to be easy to solve. And it was my naivety as a child. But one of the first things I did was sort of Mendelssohn. That's the violin concerto from Mendelssohn.
Yeah.
And I remember that was one of the earliest things I did. And the band, of course, said, "Can you play a root?"
So it was nothing. Were you watching the Beatles and were you thinking, yeah, the bass is the instrument? Or were you watching the Beatles and thinking, well, that hand looks like a violin, it's tuned the same, I'm going to go for that?
Not quite. I didn't quite know what to make of the Beatles when I saw them. It was so new, it was so unprecedented that I didn't know what to make of it. It was over a little bit of time, I guess radio and possibly other concert appearances, when it was in an engulfment of need. This was absolutely where I had to go. And that's when the violin completely
The
lost.
bass or the music? Was it the music where that you had to go?
Yeah.
Or was it the bass as an instrument?
The music. The bass was an incidental device at that particular time. And because I had spent so many years doing this, I frankly was weary of it, and I thought maybe I could take an instrument that I could learn in an hour.
Yeah.
My silly youthful naivete.
Sometimes it's good.
Well, it could be, I suppose, but
You don't know what you don't know.
I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
So I got the bass, or I got a bass, and started to practice it, and then realized, oh, there's things here.
Yeah.
That one, I can't do the fluidity of a violin. And I started to investigate, that's all. The bass was sort of a secondary thing. I can't say I fell in love with the bass for being a bass.
Yeah.
I kind of fell in love with the bass because Paul McCartney looked cool in Help playing it. There's one scene where he did this with the headstock. And I said, so when I got my bass, I was at home doing this. I thought it looked great.
Yeah.
So,
it does look great. You look pretty cool doing it now.
Thank you very much. You thought Paul was sitting here for a second. Admit it, huh?
I did. So when did it go from, you've got a bass, you're playing some tunes, like when did it actually become a serious, I could do this as a career?
When Cream happened, when Jack Bruce, in those live Cream jams, when I heard him play in that group, beyond the Beatle impact, I lost my mind. I literally was unable to think, feel, or anything else. I was kind of in awe. And it was because here was a guy, he was the first bass virtuoso, I believe. The first guy where everybody played roots, he would go. He would do things that were not suitable to a lot of pop music because it wouldn't have fit.
Yeah.
In that jam capacity, it knocked me through the floor. And I was galvanized and realized, later I kind of, in retrospect, I said, geez, I am born to be a player, to play. So that even at 66 years old, I have as much enthusiasm about this as I did when I was 14, 15, 16, 17.
Yeah.
Playing. I'm doing a clinic tomorrow. I can't wait because I have some things I'm going to play.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's what did it for me. That's what changed me to absolutely dedicate my life to music, was Jack Bruce in the live Cream performances.
Yeah. There's some great ones. Have you seen them on YouTube? Like Cream in Albert Hall and stuff like that.
Sure.
Man, yeah.
But if just for people's suggestions, for me, and this is for you, you may know the live Cream record, the one where he's in the forefront and Ginger's over here,
Yeah.
and Eric's a little bit over here. There's a tune called Sweet Wine. For me, that's the galvanizing Jack Bruce performance of all time. He did things spontaneously that I listened to it about 2 weeks ago.
Oh, really?
I put it on just to refresh, to say what a genius, certainly what a visionary of bass he was in that particular band. It was unbelievable, and I still get the goosebumps thinking about it.
And how did you get that enthusiasm and channel it into the bass? So like it's all encompassing. You're just like, you're in. I've seen this thing. I want to do this. Mm-hmm. Where do you go with it next?
I was self-taught in rock, because rock players just about historically are always self-taught.
Yeah.
If you look at the history of rock, all the guys that are successful taught themselves.
Yeah.
So I did too, because there was no places to go. So the only things I could do was practice a little bit of violin music on the bass, because it was all that I knew. I didn't know jazz, and I didn't know any of these things. And then I went on tour when I was 18, and someone told me about Berklee. And at that particular time in history, Berklee only taught musical content. They didn't teach styles or gigging, preparing for careers. What they taught was specifically how to play music.
Yeah.
That was it. So when I went, the lessons I had were on harmony, fundamentals of harmony, melody, reading. And it's ironic, but it was the Berklee of that particular period that put me on the educational courses that I often talk about today.
Really? Wow,
yes.
That's interesting.
They did it. Well, there was a couple of teachers there that said that if you want to learn how to do this you've got to learn how to read and stuff like that. And they were serious about it. I took that seriously, and I was very grateful that at that time I recognized that playing, even then as a kid, playing is this and learning is this. And because I wouldn't let the two combine, I would practice and then I would play. So I got good at two aspects of bass. And that was entirely due to the input of the Berklee of the 1972-73, the concentration on music, and that's what I did. Plus, I worked. I was a 7-night-a-week bass player in Boston.
I was good. Well, was it Steve Swallow? Was he there back in the day?
Swallow was there. There was a bass teacher
Steve
named.
Swallow fan, you see.
Oh, me too.
I'm a huge fan.
Me too. He actually told me a story where Gary Burton's quartet opened for Cream the night that they recorded.
Seriously?
Yeah, the night they recorded the Wheels of Fire tracks, the live ones, and he walked out with an upright bass like this, and Gary Burton's quartet played, and the verbiage he used was as Jack Bruce strode on stage and plugged into these wall of amps, and Swallow, a jazz upright bass player, went, "This is for me." And if you listen to early Swallow, he had that distorted sound.
Oh man, he was killing. What was it like when you got to Berklee? What was your level like? Did you steam in there? Because everybody knows like Jeff Berlin now, right? Who super virtuoso, chops to die for. But what were you like back then when you actually got to school?
Adventurous, dying to learn like a sponge. That's how I remember it, because they had jazz. Harmony. The guitar player would play chords like, in the show that we did, he would play like. and these wonderful harmonies.
Yeah.
And I was ecstatic. What is that? Go to Berklee; they'll teach it to you.
Yeah.
When I went there,
You were primed.
Huh?
You were primed to learn.
I really was. I was so into it and so excited. And the guys, fortunately, those teachers were great at the teaching of the musical content that I so needed. And I think we all needed. I mean, my classmates were John Schofield, Mike Stern, Vinnie Colaiuta came a little bit later. John Robinson, the famous drummer of Michael Jackson, was my classmate. There was a whole slew of us, and we were taught musical content. I was in my environment. I was as grateful, and it really helped. They really opened me up to harmony and notes.
I was going to ask, actually, was it really when you got to Berklee that your love of jazz started kicking in?
Later.
Later?
Yeah, they taught it to me, but I wanted to be a rocker. I was
much cooler. But I thought, you know, well, it kind of is, but like us jazz fans, I mean, we know that the jazz is actually cooler, but, you know, for most people, you know, you think rock's cooler.
Well, that's the thing. Rock and jazz things are arts.
Yeah.
In the learning of music, I had an interesting thought, which I'll share. If somebody likes rock, and if somebody likes blues, and if somebody likes heavy metal, and if somebody likes funk, and if somebody likes pop, in whatever style of contemporary music one likes, there's probably a G major chord in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And it was that going back into the content of music that got me to become a very good bass player very quickly.
Yeah.
Because I concentrated on it, not for gigs, because I don't practice for gigs. I think that gigs are incidental.
Yeah.
You play well, you know, people will know, and you'll probably get good gigs. So I practiced music for its own sake, and that's what sent me. That's what we all did back then.
Yeah.
All of us were actually into. Even Miles told a story. Can I share this really quickly?
Dude.
J.J. Johnson, the trombone player, had gotten an early version of a Charlie Parker tune. And Miles, as a kid, along with, I believe it was maybe Quincy Jones, they went to J.J. Johnson's door at 7 in the morning and said, "We gotta see this song." It was that need of musical fulfillment that I felt I had. And that's why I encourage other guys to try to look for that too.
Absolutely, man. Absolutely. So when you left Berklee, that's when you got really into jazz. Who was it that made that happen?
Well, it was an osmosis thing. I went to New York, and fortunately, I was regarded. I started to play with the Brecker brothers. I started to play with, I'm trying to think of the guys, Dave Liebman.
Yeah.
The New York scene, I got into the studio when they hired bass players. I did a lot of commercials, a lot of television recording, you know, and they called them clips. I'll show you a fun thing that made me 14,000 American dollars.
Yes.
14 grand, because I added it up later. I was very curious. This is what I played. Ready? And should I sing it or just play it?
Oh, no, play
there's
it.
a vocal.
Play it.
Okay, here it is.
And what was it the bass line to?
Kmart is your shopping place. Bop. And they played that in America at that time everywhere, and because I was a union member, they paid us royalties. And I made money, and I'd go down to the union, and we'd collect our royalty checks. And here's mine. Got a big stack. Next to me is Will Lees. He's got this. And next to him is Anthony Jackson, and he had this, you know. So I was sort of new in town, but at least I was, like, you know, on the treadmill. So, And, it was the reading that got me that, and also got me to play jazz, because I played with, it was a guy, George Young, the sax player. We played at Club Tuesdays, was it? I had the most marvelous time in New York with these wonderful musicians. Played in Gil Evans' jazz group, got me to Europe. I met Tony Levin's brother, Peter Levin, who is now one of my dearest friends. Lou Soloff, the late Lou Soloff, jazz trumpet player. He's the guy who played in Blood, Sweat, and Tears. Anyways, I was in a fertile playing time amongst some of the greatest musicians in the world.
Yeah.
And I was in with them.
Yeah. At that time.
At that time. Yeah. That era, there were two periods people might be interested in. There was a time of Miami, Miami,
Yeah.
which is the time of Pat Metheny and Jaco Pastorius and Gil Goldstein and Danny Gottlieb
Yeah.
and Steve Morse and Peter Graves Orchestra, and exactly at the same similar period, more or less, up in New York,
Really? Wow.
was this other equally, maybe a year or two apart, same fertile live musical interaction. And you have no idea how lucky I feel. I review it, that I was in with these guys. And who
Yeah.
taught me? They taught me.
Just
I
actually
learned.
doing it on the job, yeah.
They did it on the job because I could function, but then they'd lean over and go, "Hey, man, you're not swinging." Or, "Hey, man, the tone." Can I share one story?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
In
you
New
can,
York-
You can share hundreds of stories if you want.
Well, there was a band, there was a guy named Ray Barretto, who was a conga player and was considered one of the greatest salsa band leaders of all time. Salsa, Puerto Rican
Big deal,
salsa.
then.
I got into his group. He invited me to play because I met him in France on a gig. And I started to play this sort of white boy version of salsa music. And he had band members of all Puerto Rican guys who were not at all happy with me.
Yeah.
And literally got in my face. I won't use the word, "You so-and-so, you piece of such and such, you play like a piece of garbage." I mean, they did not hold back, and they let me know how they felt. And I walked out of the rehearsal shaken. But I said, "You know what? I'm not going to quit this band." And I went home, and I'm not telling the story. And for a couple, 3 weeks, I concentrated on the vibe.
Yeah.
I bought records and stuff and concentrated on the vibe. And a good 3-4 weeks later, it was one guy, actually, is Fidel. He was the one that hated me the most. I remember his name, Fidel. He leaned over to me one day and goes, "You sound pretty freaking good, man. That's good, man. You sound good." And that was a reward. But I almost ran for my life because I was genuinely shaken by the verbal attack and because musicians of that era didn't play. They did not play. There was a club uptown called Minton's. People talk about 52nd Street was the one where Charlie... After all these guys got done playing for tourists around the 52nd Street, these guys went uptown to Minton's, which is around, I think it's around 120th, something up in Harlem.
Yeah.
And when guys sometimes would sit in, and let me check this out, it's a little extreme, but if these guys couldn't play, some guys, musicians, would take them outside and beat the heck out of them.
Really?
Yeah, because
school.
they're messing with the sacred moment of music. Because look at a musician and all he has to do to prepare. He has, you got to drive to the gig, got to do the sound check, you got to this and that, and then you go play, and then you go home. So it's really a minuscule mini moment in music in time. So these guys would beat guys up. So while I don't subscribe to this sort of interaction, there are people that were so serious about music, Fidel, these guys, I didn't get beat up, but I thought they were going to get violent with me. So I had to fix it because music to some people was holy. It wasn't a jam, wasn't a hang, wasn't a this. It was, this is as meaningful as life.
Yeah. Do you think that's had do you think that you've taken that with you? From living like that kind of intense passion? Because I think you're really intensely passionate about bass and education. You're not here just to sort of like mess around. You're here to actually, lay it down as you feel it. Do you think that comes from partly that experience and being in that hotbed of that of them great players in your was it early 20s?
Yes, it was very early 20s. I would say yes in the part that if I didn't acquiesce to the mood of the community, I wasn't going to be able to play with these guys.
Yeah.
And I suppose that, again, because learning and playing are two different principles, that when I'm talking about education, it's an area this big.
Yeah.
Because I wouldn't say this guy, I don't talk about, let's say, styles of bass, because that's personal, rock, love, whatever they love. Plucking, playing, it's just not my place to comment about how someone decides to play. And even, if I may, I started to think about it and realized there was only two ways to learn how to play the bass, and always invited people to come up with a third or fourth. And the two ways I found were being self-taught and by being taught music, because it still goes on in the classic world and other things.
Yeah.
So if you're self-taught, there are no limits. It's literally how one feels, wishes, as we were chatting downstairs. If you decided on something, even if we learn from a record, it's our choice to learn from the record. If we copy a thing or listen to the tone, it's our choice. So as a sense of our choice, our self-taught decision. And then being taught, which is entirely mechanical, but totally factual to disseminate this instrument into reasonable notes. So what I'm saying is that since I couldn't think of a third or fourth option that exists that has any kind of validation, that's why I've always been this serious about the education, because I'm not offering thoughts that are my philosophy. I don't have a philosophy that came from me. This is methods that existed and has existed and was shown to me, and it works. And so that's why I'm this way, because whatever one plays, of course, is their decision. What I'm hoping to do is to guide people who lay down a check. Here's a check. Teach me. And that's the philosophy. Your car is broken, fix it. Don't invent a new way to fix my automobile. Don't come up with a kind of a new process. This works. Here's this. I got to go to work. Cook my dinner. Don't use, ultrasound waves and invent. I got this whole new way to invent to cook your burger. This works. Here's a check. Please do the best you can. And since all things seems to be taught this way, that it's our academic, I thought it works for the bass as well. There, I'm done. I said my piece.
So when you're learning, because you are mainly self-taught, right?
I'm self-taught on the bass completely.
So you obviously, in terms of, let's talk specifically about playing jazz, because we were talking about it, in terms of when you got to New York and you were playing with them players. When it came to actually learning how to get your language together, because there's getting the hard ass that's kicking your ass in the bandstand, but then in terms of how does that translate into, and how does it translate, and for people watching, into learning walking bass lines, getting jazz vocabulary together, or solo and vocabulary, like how did that happen? How did you do that?
I did it over time. People, may I demonstrate?
Absolutely.
I've asked many people to play a walking bass line. So people might do a walking bass line like so. And what I noticed is I can't hear the harmony. Which sort of goes into the thing when people refer to the fact that time or groove is first, it's last, because one needs notes to play time and one needs notes to play groove. So groove and time are the last considerations in a performance. It's what it gives us the results of playing the notes. So what I noticed is that in a walking bass line, like a blues, made a lot of sense because I went from 1 to 4 there. Because where am I? B flat. Where am I going? To E flat. And so I broke down the components of walking lines to an extremely simple formula, because no one owns it. Nobody can tell me that, oh, this is the Ray Brown walking line, or this is the whomever, or
Ron Carter
walking bass line. What it is a perfect academic walking bass line. It has no mistakes. So in practice, if I can practice perfectly, I'm learning perfection, and I get better. That's what I did. I would sometimes listen to records, write out.
I was going to say, were you just like transcribing yourself?
I did it by year.
Were you just, obviously not right now, but were you just sort of like learning, like listening to as many people that have done it before and just thinking, right, I'm going to figure this out. I can tell you how I did it.
How'd you do
I
it?
got standards. I got the best people that I could find on record, Ray Brown and Ron Carter and those guys. And I got the standard.
Yeah.
And I got the record, and I pressed play, and then I just worked it out. And I was like, okay, over this chord, they're playing these notes. And over the next chord, they're playing these notes, and they get there by playing, they're doing a passing tone there. And when they go to that 4 minor chord there, they're doing this. And that's how I did it. That's how I did it. I was just really interested. Did you do it the same way?
Yes, and everybody did it your way you said. It's like we listened to records and we played with guys. I mean, literally, there isn't really any other way to learn how to do this stuff. Yeah. You play with people and you listen.
Yeah.
Or if you're fortunate, you'll pay for a teacher who will write it out for you. There's a concept that I'm not in agreement with, that whereby people will write out a bass line and then the teacher will correct it afterward.
Oh, right. Okay, yeah.
You may have heard of that. So in schools or someplace, they'll say, write a walking bass line. Okay, now let me show you where you did it wrong. And to me, that's one step, maybe 2 steps too many. Because if I write a perfect exercise and present it, you're learning perfection. It's like write out a sentence in Spanish and I'll show you where you made your mistakes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Rather than in Spanish, yo voy el doctor, yo quiero comer algo.
Yeah.
So the lesson isn't the student trying their best and being corrected, but the best way to improve, and I know this is the best way to improve, is if I, the teacher, am fully responsible to say, this is the part. Because then, one, the onus is on me.
They can get a feel for how it actually sounds and sits under the fingers as well. I'm sure Zoltan, Zoltan, right? So we've got
I love Zoltan.
Well, he doesn't live around here, but he teaches around here, right?
He's an old friend of mine.
Who's Zoltan? Yeah. He actually teaches it every single week. He stays at a friend's house just like half a mile away from here. So, hey, Zoltan, if you're watching.
Yeah, Zoltan Dekani.
But I think that we were talking about you, and he was talking about the experience when he was getting lessons from you way back in the day.
Yeah.
And he said that one of the most helpful things that you did is like, here's a walking bass line, just learn to play it, and you'll just get a feel for what it feels like under the fingers to play a perfect walking bass line.
Correct.
And then, first of all, instead of trying to go from the ground up when they don't even know anything about it, right? So figure out how to actually play the perfect walking bass line first, and then you're going to, reverse engineer it. Oh, there's a third here, there's a fifth here, and those parts as well.
And here's an interesting thing. There's only about 4 or 5 good walking bass lines that anyone can come up with anyway. One of the slight myths I think about music is that you could write 1,000 different bass lines. Well, you could, but you can only write about 5 good ones. And the proof might be... Or... Now I'm starting to run out a little bit.
Yeah.
So we can keep stretching it and stretching it. It's just too hard.
Yeah.
So that's the thing about music, is that if people are interested, to learn is very simple. That's why I was doing this. That's it. Now do it in E flat. Then do it in A flat. You see, if bass players recognize that the bass was built... Here's a cool question, which I've asked at clinics. What's the very first purpose that a bass was built? What was literally the most... If you go to the left, well, if you're in Israel, if you go to the right, but here in England, if you go to the left, as much as one can in one's thinking, what is the basic reason a bass was built? In the simplest form. I don't know if, it doesn't matter if you get it or not, but the answer is to play a note.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not to play a root, because what if the music doesn't require it? It's not to play a bottom end, because what if it's up here written? So it tends to be logical to me that if all instruments in music, certainly all orchestral classical music, all jazz music, are taught only, I repeat, only by reading music. when I find that maybe our instrument isn't, that wouldn't it be a good idea, since the bass is actually designed to learn notes, built to play notes, why not be put in a position to be taught notes if one pays a check to be taught?
Yeah.
And that's just my logic. To learn Spanish, the only way that I can come up with that I could possibly speak Spanish, and people say that music is a language, so if music is a language, the only way I could speak Spanish is to learn the words.
Yeah.
There's no other way to do it.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. Absolutely, yeah.
So that's how I look at this. So.
And did you, when you were learning, obviously we just talk about walking bass lines, did the same thing translate to soloing as well? Was that the same process? You're listening, there's this chord, he's playing this, okay, I've got it. Is that how you actually started to put your vocabulary together?
Partly. I have at home stacks of transcriptions of jazz solos, which
That you did, yeah.
Yeah, that I transcribed. I never transcribed bass players for me.
Yeah.
Because I always felt that we bass players are a little bit limited in the harmony, whereas pianists and sax players and sometimes guitarists
yeah.
are way less confined in the harmony sense.
Yeah.
And so I would do things like, there was I don't know if you're interested, but there's this is a song by Cannonball Adderley. Those are the chords.
Yeah.
And he played. And there isn't a bass player that I know of that would play this line.
That would play that line, yeah.
Can you hear this? I turned it down.
Oh yeah, sounds killing.
Because I didn't have the frets. And these are the things that I never would have thought of.
Yeah.
And it got me, if I may. And these things that I'm creating, for better or worse, come from all the transcriptions and all the jazz gigs. But this could happen if I did it in a rock thing. If you have a... You know, you could still, and then put it through amps. Yeah,
it's totally transferable.
Totally transferable.
Yeah. Where did the legato thing come? I've got to ask you. I'm looking down my questions. I'm like, it's not yet, but I need to ask you now because obviously you just played that beautiful stuff. Where did it come from? And is it something that came later on when you were playing bass, or did you have that in your, under your fingers when you were younger?
It came later because I had it in my head. I'm not a genius, and I didn't have a style, and I didn't have a sound. But I always wanted to have a sound, and I always wanted to have a style. So in the pursuit of something that I hoped was going to be mine to some degree as an artist, I noticed that a lot of guys were very sort of, Jocko-esque, that sort of...
Yeah. Jocko picked most of the stuff, didn't he? Yeah.
He picked everything, and that was because of his particular vision of the bass. And when he got popular, even to now, these guys... And they're amazing. They're 10 times better than me, and they're the best bass players. I'm not saying this lip service. There are way better bass players than me today, in that phenomenal ability to navigate a bass.
There's dudes on the scene that it's insane.
Insane.
It's insane. Should we just drop Hadrian Fro's name right?
Hadrian has always been my first. It's simple.
If
but-
there was an alien, if lizard people do exist, Hadrian might be one of them. Yeah, but he's just insane, isn't he? Yeah.
He's insane. And there's a lot of guys in that area. And that's when it occurred to me that perhaps I can find another way to play.
Because there's not that many bass players that actually play with a ton of legato. I would say that, I don't know anybody that really jumps to mind. Anybody for you?
No.
Like, I'm sure there is some people.
There
but
must be.
There's not as many, is there? And you're really the grandfather of it as well.
Well, I like
The Godfather, sorry. Godfather's a bit cooler than the grandfather.
Give me 15 minutes to come over there and I'll show you.
Yeah.
So, okay, let me just think. Oh, here's something. I mean, I don't know if it works, but this I pulled out of a Beethoven symphony, and of course I'm missing about 98 guys, but. Do you recognize it? And it goes on. It's the Ninth Symphony, the third movement. I know I went a little off the subject of the legato, but if I did, somehow it wouldn't sound the same.
Got it. Yeah. About Charlie Banacos. And when did you study with him as well?
Oh, I started I quit the New York scene to move up to Boston to study. That's how I was, I was rapidly going up into the New York scene as one of the new guys, and I was already one of the older guys.
So
now.
You went from Boston, Berklee, to New York.
To New York.
And then back to Boston.
Because there was a lot about music I still didn't know. And it was very, like I say, I'm an odd bird. I was just pulled in that way. So I went to Charlie. And Charlie was one of the three greatest jazz and music teachers of the 20th century. I'll debate anybody on that.
Yeah.
Charlie's thing was entirely another version of the early Berklee, my youth as a violinist, and finally Charlie Banacos, including the teachers I had on and off in New York, that it was music only.
Yeah.
That a lesson from Charlie might include notes and chords based entirely on a McCoy Tyner principle.
Charlie Banacos, guys, was sort of like this legendary.
Yeah, I'm off on the tangent.
No, you're not. Like, I was just sort of like giving them some context.
Yeah.
I used to sort of like read in magazines and this guy studied with Charlie Banacos. Or Jeff used to study with him, and then Stern.
I would be as excited to get a Charlie lesson in the mail as I would be that like a kid would be on Christmas. I really was.
Really, yeah.
He worked with cassettes.
Yeah.
So we'd do a thing. Hi, Charlie, here's my playing. And Charlie was a very nice man, but he'd tell me, so I would do a solo. And this is when I was quite popular and doing well.
Yeah.
And he'd send me back a thing. And Charlie was, hey, Jeff, man, what's happening, man? Hey, Jeff, what's happening? He's just a funny, quirky guy. Hey, man, I checked out your solo, man. Listen, man, you're playing too horizontal, man. We got to get you vertical. And he heard that in my playing.
Yeah.
And he gave me lessons in vertical bass playing, which knocked me out. I'm a little hyper here because I'm thinking about it.
Go for it.
There was a solo. I'll only give you a few bars. There was a solo by McCoy Tyner on a song called, if I'm remembering it right, Passion Dance. And the line that McCoy played was, ba-boo-doo-ba-da-boo, ba-ba-boo-doo-ba-doo. Ba 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 do ba do ba dee ba ba do ba do ba dee ba ba. Now, why that's such a great thing is that's an F scale.
Got you. Yeah.
When people talk about playing, scales are not particularly good vehicles for use. They really aren't. They're more of an academic thing in order to sort of learn that harmony.
Yeah.
But when people solo on scales, this is what I hear at the clinic, so I know that this is sort of the idea.
Yeah.
What Charlie did is he noticed in a McCoy song that I'll do it in the key of F because that's what it was. And he, instead of an F dominant, what Charlie noticed is that they were playing an F triad and an E flat triad. I know none of this maybe affects some of you guys, but it's so easy to understand is that the notes, that's the scale. There's no A.
Yeah.
So what that does is, that's a C7 scale. And that's the vertical he talked about. Boo, 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 boo. Instead of ba, 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 ba.
Yeah.
So
Triadic pairs and
yes, two chords, and then he would do it with this, and then with an augmented triad. I mean, he gave me stuff, and every week I'd go, whee!
And how long did you study with him for?
On and off for 30 years.
Wow.
I mean, it would be pure. I wouldn't see him for a few years, but he had a waiting list of 2 years, but I'd call him up and he'd go, hey, man, I'll give you the lesson right away. I was always at the top. So.
Yeah. So when you moved back to Boston, like, what did you do then? What came for you after then?
I went out finally to Los Angeles but I had made some good money playing in New York, and I just lived on it and studied. And then I went out to LA and made my career there for a while. I went to MI, taught there.
I was going to say, because you went to MI, didn't you? Taught there?
I taught there. I didn't go there, but I taught there.
Yeah. And what was it like when you moved to LA? Similar scene or completely different?
A great scene. I was busy there, but and at the same time, there was a difficult period for me. They had the earthquake, and I ran for my life. The Northridge quake, it really panicked me.
Was that huge?
Yeah. Just awful. But I was busy. I toured. I was in Europe a lot. I was in Asia a lot. Different acts, different bands, different records. Taught at MI. Then I went to. I didn't have a solo career at that time. Then I went to Florida, and would tour Europe quite a bit, and did my little jazz records. You know, the one you heard with Liebman on a jet plane.
Yeah.
And where am I now? Now I'm in Nashville.
And now you're in Nashville,
And now I'm doing my own thing. And I do a bit as me, and then there you go.
Jeff, thank you so much.
Daddy, thank you, buddy. How nice to hang. Look at us. I've seen you online for a long time. Thank you for having me. Thanks to you guys. Thank you for being patient.
Hang on. Oh, and a final question.
Yes, please.
Runaway Train, just show me how you do that.
Runaway Train.
I've been listening to this record for too long, and there's just this crazy intro to it, and I was just like, come on, I'm going to have to ask him about this. I always like that part.
do this at clinics.
That's how you do it. Thank you so much, man.
Thank you, buddy.
It's been awesome.
Thank you.
Man.
Thank you. Thank you, too.
Cheers, guys.